All right, welcome everybody. My name is Kelly Bell, and I'm with the Master Recycler program, which has gone through a lot of changes this year, as we all have. One of the things we have done formally as Master Recyclers is we've been assisting an organization called EcoGeneration with recycling takebacks. And I just thought it was important to introduce David to folks who maybe haven't met and maybe don't know about EcoGeneration. I'm very impressed with this newer waste-based nonprofit to our area and all the things that they've been doing. So without further ado, welcome David. Hello.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for agreeing to do this on a day that you also had a collection.
I was going to say sorry about the reschedule. I know we agreed to do this earlier in the day, but we did have our Cottage Grove recycling take back today, so that's why we had to reschedule it to later.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being willing to do that.
Of
So
course.
you were at in Cottage Grove. You do it at the library, right? In the parking lot.
We do it in the Cottage Grove Community Center / library parking lot, yeah, on East Gibbs.
How many folks did you have today, do you think?
More than 75. We had a line and it was very steady for the entire day.
Just steady.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by steady, I mean both of our tables were working as fast as they could the entire 2.5 hours.
Now you've been doing collections in Cottage Grove for over a year.
Yes.
And firstly, during the farmers market, right? Downtown, wasn't that the beginning of it?
The very first start was at the farmers market, correct. It started at the farmers market when Shauna had her Master Recyclers booth there. I met her there and I had a couple streams that I could recycle in. We discussed it and we agreed that I could start collecting with her. And a week after we discussed that is when Lane County opened the community collector program.
So you became a part of that right away when we did that.
To be honest, when we found out about it, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks before our training and before there was any actual collections. But Shauna and I started collecting immediately. And so, yeah, Shauna and I were collecting from the beginning.
Excellent, excellent. So what David's referring to is when Lane County started to try to address the plastics that were dropped from commingle on some level, we created a system of community collectors so people could collect in their neighborhoods and we wouldn't have 1,000 people come to our facility all on one day, because we did that twice and that was kind of defeats the purpose in terms of the carbon calculation. So we trained a bunch of community members, and David, I think you're still the highest collector by far of all of the folks we have by quite a magnitude. So can you talk about what you were doing before that, before you became a Master Recycler, before you met Shauna at the farmers market?
So before I met Shauna at the farmers market, well, I'll address kind of where we started. Plastics were dropped at curbside and I wasn't okay with that. I researched a lot of different ways to try and recycle plastic, and when I found a system that worked for me and my household, I started doing it for other households, and the other households would cover the cost of whatever the recycling was. And when we first started, it was not cheap to recycle. It was costing us several $100s. And so that's when I decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do it as a nonprofit. And then we also started doing a litter pickup on World Ocean Day. And I came up with a bright idea of why don't we clean all the plastic so that we can recycle
it? Sorry. I'm sorry. I just can't imagine that, of all the materials that I've handled, making that choice. That is such dedication.
Well,
Such
the irony is the litter pickups, we also would scrap all of the metal, any cardboard or paper that I found, because I knew it was contaminated and wouldn't really do well in the recycling stream. But I also knew that it didn't belong on the side of the road for a lot of different reasons. So I would bring it home and put it in my compost pile. The only things that we ever really threw away were like shoes and just the various things that really are almost impossible to recycle without, I mean, you think cleaning plastics is dedication. I have contemplated trying to recycle a shoe I found on the side of the road, and that just wasn't in the cards. So plastics is a lot of work. It is a lot of cleaning when it comes up from the side of the road.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where we started. And then as I started recycling more with TerraCycle, I found a recycler for my own number twos. And so I had recycled number twos for a while. I was shipping them to Nevada. And so that was working out, and it was cheaper because they were paying the shipping, but I wasn't getting any money. Then we joined a couple TerraCycle brigades that I'd been on waiting lists for almost 2 or 3 years for. And I mean, that's a lot of dedication, waiting on a waiting list for 3 years to recycle something. And so then the first thing I started recycling was cigarette butts, and for free. That was the very first brigade I was in, was cigarette butts. And I thought it was amazing that I could recycle something that most would consider such like toxic waste. And so for a while I would try and pick up absolutely every cigarette butt I saw, which, let's talk about, a lot of work. And then after that, I would have to say that a month and a half is when I got into the personal care. About 3 weeks after that, I was like, okay, there's no limit here. I can literally send as much as I want. And so I need to collect bigger and on a bigger scale. And so that's when I sought out Shauna. I met Shauna because I actually messaged the farmer's market on my own and asked if I could have a space to collect these things.
Right.
They're like, oh, wait, we have a master recycler. Why don't you share a table with her? And that's how I was introduced to Shauna.
Wow. And that's how you made it to the master recycler class.
That is exactly how I made it to the master recycler class, because Shauna had talked about this class and like said that I really should take it. And so I signed up and I took it. And I think when I finally got you my application, you were like, well, do you want to do this one, or do you want to do the one in Cottage Grove, which is like in 6 or 7 months? And
right.
I chose to do the one in Eugene just because I had heard so much about it and was like, okay, well, I will go ahead and take this class. And that's how I met you. And that's how I became a master recycler.
I'm really glad you did take the Eugene class, because it turns out that Cottage Grove class was the last live class we did before COVID. So that would have been cutting it kind of close if anything, else had come up. So I'm really glad you took the Eugene class. I want to go back to cigarette butts just a little bit. That's really not in my wheelhouse, but I was aware that cigarette butts were being recycled by TerraCycle, and I would always kind of just shake my head at the different things that they would do, because at a point, I don't know if they still do, they had a diaper recycling program. So, cigarette butts sounds crazy, but it's not the craziest thing that they have recycled. So the thing that's most impressive about that, and I think you and I have talked about this a little bit, is that if you're finding a cigarette butt, that means if you didn't pick it up, it's on its way to the water. That's the next stop. Well, if it's on the ground, it's on the way to the water.
The other issue with it is people think that cigarette butts disintegrate, but they don't. They're photodegradable, and it just breaks into microplastics really quickly. And what most people don't realize is a cigarette butt on the ground can contaminate 7 to 9 liters of groundwater. And it will take 150 cubic feet per liter. So 150 cubic feet of soil per liter to actually get it out if it goes into the ground. And if it doesn't, if it goes into the watershed, it can go, it can go all the way to the ocean. And when you think about nicotine, it is a very caustic, deadly chemical. And so, yeah, if I didn't pick it up, it would go somewhere. It didn't just magically disappear.
Right. This is true. I'm looking at the attendees to see if I need to mute somebody. Make sure your mic is muted. Okay. So I just heard you say, and you've said this before, that you were on the wait list for TerraCycle brigades, and I think lots of people are familiar with sippy pouches and those sorts of things. But it sounds like you were on these wait lists even before 2018, which I think of as the kind of informal start of EcoGeneration.
Yes, so I actually came across TerraCycle brigades pretty quickly after plastics were dropped from commingle. When I say pretty quickly, I'd say like within a week. And
okay.
I signed up for the personal care brigade that we do. And they said that there was a wait list, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll sign up for that. And so I signed up for it. In the meantime, was recycling cigarette butts. And then I also became a recycler of Febreze containers and laundry detergent containers, which actually consisted a lot of what we were coming across, especially when you consider what you see at a recycling take back. And we did that for a very long time. The personal care took a very, very long time to get on that brigade.
So before the 245 collection, you were sending those kinds of plastics to TerraCycle.
Yes, and before the very first plastic roundup that Lane County did. I found out about your guys' roundup a week after it occurred.
The first one?
Correct.
Wow.
And then I didn't attend the second one. I knew about the second one, but I didn't attend it because I had researched plastic recycling and plastic waste so much. I had concerns about, well, where's their stuff going? Mm-hmm. And so I stuck to my own recyclers and continued just amassing from the community, going through my own recyclers. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing that I've always insisted on, I will do whatever is necessary to get you clean materials or get you what you want, but I want to know what's going on. I want to know where it's going. It can't go to China to get processed. It has to be processed in the United States.
Right. Well, fortunately, we are aligned in our thinking. And you were on that tour when we took several volunteers that were attached to the Sheldon Community Center up to Denton Plastics in Portland. What did you think of that visit?
So I really liked Denton. It made me trust the 245s a lot more. I had been collecting in the 245 stream for the whole time before that. Never once did I take my own plastic waste and put it in a 245 collection until I went to Denton. Once I went to Denton, the 245 program at that point for me, it was a lot more transparent than, it was a lot more transparent at that point for me than even during the discussions and when we were getting trained.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is, you were operating similarly to the people who ship with e-stewards, in inspecting the facilities, finding out where everything goes. That's kind of a best practice in a way. I don't think there is anything like that for plastic, but there should be. So
I agree that there should be, and that's why I emphasize that EcoGeneration, we only practice ethical recycling. If we don't know where it's going, then I won't add a program. And that's, you and I have discussed in an entirely different stream that has been kind of pressured, and people have tried getting me to add. And my concerns with it is, well, where does it go? What actually happens with all of this? And
Right.
okay, so I know where the paper pulp goes, but where's the other parts of this package go?
Right.
And
Right.
so until I actually know where stuff goes, I have a hard time myself recycling it. I've been a diehard recycler since before I was 12 years old. I insisted my house always recycle. And so that's kind of the guiding force, I think, behind me wanting to do the right thing.
What was the difference between 2019 and 2020? In 2019, I was observing you doing collections in Oak Ridge, in Cottage Grove, in Cresswell, and I thought of you as, and I think you even stated this, as someone who was bringing fairness in recycling to the rural area, essentially equal recycling as possible to the rural areas. That seemed to be a developing mission of yours.
So growing up in rural Oregon, not necessarily in Lane County, but actually in Deschutes County, we didn't have recycling. And so when the community collector program came out, there was a lot of community collectors for Eugene and Springfield.
Yes.
There was a lot. It was blanketed very well.
Mostly Eugene, but yes.
When you look at the outlying areas, with the exception of Florence, there wasn't like big groups for each town. And so that was kind of the guiding force. But the other guiding force was in Cottage Grove, we can't recycle any plastics whatsoever in curbside.
Isn't that frustrating? Because in Cresswell you can, in Cottage Grove you can't.
Correct.
And they're right next to each other.
And
it's very frustrating.
It's been a mission of mine to capture as much of that as I can, to be as helpful to rural communities as I can. At times, a lot of people had thought maybe we were overdoing it, because Shauna and I were doing, initially it was just Cottage Grove, and Shauna and I did the farmers market literally every week.
Mm-hmm.
Every week we would amass several bags full, more than what was the minimum requirement at the very beginning for us. Because remember, we were rural, so we were told, you know what, anytime that you can fill a car, just bring it in. It's okay. And so we would easily be able to fill a car and bring it in, but we would actually stockpile it to the point that we required a city truck, a massive city truck, to actually bring it in. And so we were doing a lot of recycling for Cottage Grove. Then I kind of was noticing that Cresswell people were learning about it and coming over from Cresswell. And to me, that didn't make sense. The carbon footprint, it would make much more sense if I went over to Cresswell.
Right.
We did that, and then we went to Oak Ridge. And so as donations in the area is kind of permitted to cover the expenses of this, because you know, one collection isn't that expensive, but when you start doing large collections frequently, you realize I need tables, I need canopies, and then you realize, well, I need people, and then, well, I need more help, and then, well, I need locations, and for locations, I need insurance. And so, and then to spread information, I need a website.
Right.
And so it's kind of snowballed, and I think we've done a pretty good job at trying to meet that snowball as quickly as we can. The difference between 2019 and 2020 was COVID, coronavirus. So we were required to get general liability because we needed to operate out of a city location on our own. And so we got general liability, and when we got it, COVID was across seas, but our attorneys were like, you know, might be smart to make sure you cover the flu and other illnesses in your request for insurance. So we did. And so we have coverage for all of these types of things that weren't necessarily even considered in
Right.
the early days for nonprofits.
Wow.
And so when COVID hit, yeah, we stopped collections for that 30 days for the stay-at-home orders.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, Kelly, because you helped a lot during that process, a lot of stuff was going to the landfill during this time. And
Yeah.
I was having a hard time with this. And so we got the essential services declaration because we proved, look, we can get the PPE, we can do all of what is required. We're waste management, we're recycling, we need to be able to do our job. And also,
I'm gonna interject here just a little bit. Not all mass recyclers are retired, but many of them are, and many of the most active volunteers are. Some of them, in addition to being elders, also have complicating factors that make them more at risk for COVID. And so as a result of that, I did not feel comfortable even creating any sort of volunteer opportunities. And I heard from people who had been volunteering in the past that they were just saying, I got to sit out for a while until this thing, settles down. And yet, and because of that, also community collectors stopped. Even after the lockdown, community collectors in the Eugene area stopped. But the desire of people to get their plastic recycled, not necessarily the volunteers, but the people who were, I guess, customers, that never stopped. And people were still collecting and people were still anxious. Even in this situation with COVID, that was still on people's minds. And so, and of course, I'm at Lane County, I'm at Waste Management, I'm getting these phone calls. And I really didn't want to do it, but I felt so much pressure, community pressure, that I asked you, I didn't put you on the spot, but I asked you if you would consider doing a couple of Eugene collections just to take the pressure off until, community collectors got back into the swing of things. Because one of the things that's true is community collectors, they're doing their own thing. They're not publicly posting, they're doing it in their neighborhoods. They're afraid that they'll get illegally dumped on. So, we can refer people, ones and twos, but there has been nothing in Eugene for all of 2020 that I could publicly say, yes, you can go there on this day and this time. And so I kind of reluctantly asked you because I knew how busy you were and, no one's paying you to do this, and you graciously agreed, and I really appreciate it. And I was really impressed with what got done at the two Eugene locations, especially at Sheldon and Amazon. What made you decide to go ahead and do that with all you already had on your plate? And keep in mind, all of the hundreds of community collectors that we trained were from the Eugene area, so we had tried to create a system, and yet it wasn't working last year at all.
So, Kelly, it is quite interesting that a lot of community collectors rightfully stopped at the beginning of COVID. A lot wasn't known about it.
Right.
I started EcoGeneration after a lot of health problems. I really shouldn't be out and about in the community even right now. I have a lot of pre-existing conditions, and my desire to come to Eugene was to kind of show people, there is a way that you can do a community collection safely.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have done them safely over and over and over again in rural towns a month after the initial lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
We were back open in June. We did a drive-through in June for Cottage Grove and then another one in July. In August, we were back in full operation where we were doing normal operations. So I wanted to kind of show people it is possible. But then when I got to Eugene, it became a slightly different story. It's possible, but it takes a lot of organization, a lot of PPE, a lot of time, a lot of energy. and a lot of attention to all of the tiny details of safety. And so we had successfully done a total of 3 Amazon recycling takebacks and 2 at Sheldon. The very first one at Sheldon, we learned a lot of lessons. After that, with a lot of work between you, myself, Jeff, Kai, we worked really hard. We perfected the Eugene system. And so ultimately, as 2020 ended, we made the decision to go ahead and stay in Eugene because A, we have the system down, and B, COVID isn't going anywhere. And while there is one more public collection, it doesn't appear like there's going to be many open collections anytime soon.
And then I also, because, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, asked you if you would consider Florence, and it sounded like you were already considering Florence, which had a very active community collector program and a great partnership between First United Methodist Church and Florence Master Recyclers, but COVID affected that as well, and affected what the church was able to do. It affected what the volunteers, depending on their health and age, were able to do. And so, go ahead.
Florence was in the works before you came to me about Eugene. Florence was actually in the works before I went to Crestwell, and the reason it was in the works was very, very, very early on, one of the Florence Master Recyclers found my Recycling in the Grove Facebook group, and that was Nancy. And Nancy had messaged me, and because Nancy messaged me and she had discovered all of these other things that she can recycle with us. And she was like, well, it would be great if you could come to Florence at some point. And I'm like, yeah, that would be great, because I actually have people driving over from Florence. I have people driving over from Coos Bay. And it would be easier if I went somewhere on the coast. And so, yeah, we were actually kind of going to move to Florence. But Eugene ended up taking the first step, and actually very, very quickly after our first couple Eugene events, we went to Florence.
Well, that community in particular is very civically engaged, and also very engaged on the topic of plastic. So I think that's a great location to do it. And now, irrespective of COVID, you committed to 3 more collections there. And before we get into that, I was mentioning EcoGeneration to Carolyn Stein, who talked about the circular economy the other evening. And she said, her question to me was, that's interesting. Does it pencil? And I giggled and said, no. She said, oh, so this must be a labor of love. And I said, I think so. Can you talk a little bit about that part of it?
So it is a labor of love, but at the same time, my motivation and the reason why I do this, and a lot of people know a lot of the background story of EcoGeneration, there's a lot of motivation behind that. And so it is a labor of love. I spent a very, very, very large amount of money in 2017 out of my own pocket recycling various types of waste for various people. In 2019, I again spent money. We spent money on becoming a nonprofit and on startup costs, and that was out of my own pocket. And then being a nonprofit, we were able to start asking the community for donations and for sponsors. And by the end of 2020, the community sponsorships. So you brought up the United Methodist Church of Florence. So they were actually one of our very first Florence sponsors to bring us over. And so when we do go into a community, it is generally in cooperation with all of the systems that are already in place. I don't like to go in and railroad people. Since day one of community collections, it was requested of EcoGeneration, since we take all of these other things in these other streams, other than just 245, we were asked to make sure that we distinguished ourselves. And so to distinguish ourselves, we call it a recycling take back, but we moved over to Florence, working with the master recycling program, working with all of the individuals there. It's a labor of love on my part in that I've washed over 900 pounds of plastic since we started. But it's also a labor of love of the community. The community has been very helpful in coming out and supporting us and making sure that we have what we need. The community comes out and volunteers their time to ensure that the recycling take back goes well. And the community also comes out and is very helpful in providing support anytime that we've actually openly said, hey, we're in a bind. We need to pay for our storage unit. Can you help?
And yet, the largest collections that you've done, I believe, have been in Eugene. You went from 75 attendants at a Cottage Grove or a Crestwell to, and I think even the Florence was around 150 to 350 in Eugene. And those, there doesn't seem to be, unfortunately, even though the demand is higher and the expectation for a free service is higher, the financial support doesn't seem to be there. And I'm very frustrated by it. And I wonder what your thoughts are and what your thinking is going into 2021, if you are going to continue to serve the urban community, and if so, how are you going to be able to afford it?
So we've done a lot of calculations, and to stay in Eugene, the average recycling take back overhead cost without paying anybody any actual employment is $560 for Eugene events.
For one event.
For one event. Because there's the insurance, there's the materials, there's everything that goes into that. The website, right, the web design, the printing, all of that. And so for us to stay in Eugene, we need the community to support us in the in-kind donations at site. At the last South Eugene one, other than in the recycling stream where we charge, and all of that money that we charge for that recycling stream, we literally pay right back out in recycling it. So we, after all of that was said and done, we raised $43 at the last South Eugene event. It seemed like, because there was a lot of $20, there was a lot of $20 bags, but when you take all of that money out, it really didn't actually add up to a large sum.
Right. So what I'm observing is you're literally redeeming bottles and cans to pay for gas, to pay for insurance, to pay for printing, to pay for PPE. I mean, that's part of your budget, essentially.
Correct. Without the cans and bottles, I wouldn't be able to pay for some of my bills. And cans and bottles and in-kind donations haven't been able to pay for all of the bills. The truck that I bought from one of my volunteers ended up dying and needed $4,500 worth of work. I don't have that money. And so now I'm out of truck again, and I'm driving and doing recycling in my Subaru Legacy again. Which, Kelly, you and I both know I've done really well. I've done it. I've done really well. I also rely on a lot of volunteers and hope that when people say that they'll come and transport, that they come through. We've also had to rent a U-Haul truck. We've rented U-Haul trailers. And so, yeah, at times we're putting more money out still than really what's coming in from Eugene.
I've seen a couple of community collectors rent a U-Haul. We don't reimburse them. I've seen community collectors come, piled over the cab, trailing a trailer. I mean, the people that do this are incredibly dedicated, but they don't do it every month, and they don't do it several times a month. In order to have this be a consistent service, you know, quarterly or whatever it's going to be, I mean, there does need to be some infrastructure, and I don't know what attendees think is happening, how they think it's being supported, but it's not being supported very strongly financially.
I'm going to chime in on this. A lot of people, even individuals who come to us with some of the dirtiest things, think that we're magically going to be able to turn that into money.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make it unequivocal, and I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to make it very clear for the books. Half of what we collect, which is 2, 4, 5 materials, that's 50% of roughly of our collections, whether it be Eugene or rural, we do not get money for. We spend money storing it. We spent money getting our own super sacks to ensure that A, they were clean, and to B, also ensure that they were something that I and my volunteers could actually readily handle, because we don't have a forklift. We don't have a lot of big burly people to lift things. I have physical limitations. I can't even lift one of my own super sacks.
Right.
And so in that retrospect, I think people think that the 245, we're getting money for it, but we're not. And I can also say, I know beyond a reasonable doubt that Lane County isn't getting any money for it.
That's right.
We're both. But in retrospect of the money that it costs to actually do this, is it really coming out with any of us coming ahead with that material?
No. It's all being subsidized, labor-wise, financially. It's all subsidized. In Lane County, to the greater degree, is the FTE. It's the staff time that goes into it. And so for you, that would be, I guess, the volunteer labor. But we can punch a clock. The volunteers, it's like you got to hope that they still want to show up.
Yes, and so that's a big piece of what we have to work with, and we also have to make that balance not only with what we're asking of the volunteers, but we also have to hope that the community isn't going to treat them so poorly that they don't want to come back.
That's another thing that frustrated me to no end is it's not everybody, but it's that sort of adage of the 10% take the 90% of energy. I observed some people treating volunteers or attempting to treat volunteers really poorly. And that was something that we started in the Eugene events. And that was something that we brought up in meetings when we were kind of dissecting that, and ended up kind of having a go-to person if we ever saw that happening again. And it's unfortunate that that had to happen, but here, we're doing this, we're doing it on Sunday, volunteering, taking stuff.
So Kelly, I'm going to bring up.
That would be garbage, and people are being offended and think we should be doing it better, faster, stronger, higher, prettier. I don't know.
I want to bring up the one instance at the first South Eugene recycling take back where the gentleman had a bunch of stuff in totes, and a volunteer ended up coming and getting me because you both were like, this is all really gross, dirty, and moldy. And he was not being nice to either of you. And so I stepped in because I'm not being the one who started this. I feel like I'm going to be the one who's going to stand between the volunteer and the community member. And I'm a counselor. I know a lot of de-escalation. And that gentleman treated me so poorly and screamed and yelled and said such harsh things that I wanted to walk out of my own recycling take back and literally just walk and go and not ever come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's another thing, is a big support from the community difference between the rural area and the urban area. In the rural area, we have some people who might not be happy that everything has to be clean. In the urban area, we've gotten cussed at. We've had people throw stuff at us. we've had our worst dumps in the urban area. We've not actually ever had more than, I think, a bag ever dumped at a rural area, but we had a pile at a Sheldon event.
Yep.
And EcoGeneration has to pay for any of that to get recycled that can't go to 245.
Or, as I saw in a video that you published, you're washing it in your bathtub because it came in such poor condition. I wonder if it reminds me of the small town I grew up in. Is like, you're gonna have to face these people. That's not gonna happen in Florence. That's not gonna happen in Cottage Grove because everybody knows everybody. In Eugene, that's not necessarily true. You know, people will behave badly and may or may not ever see the people surrounding them again. I don't know. Is that part of it?
I think another piece of this is in rural areas, access to equitable recycling opportunities isn't there, and it is in urban areas. It's taken for granted in Eugene and Springfield. Whereas in Cottage Grove, Oak Ridge, Crestwell, Florence, we're told that by almost everyone, regardless of how long they stand and wait, that they're happy we're doing this. In Eugene, if people stand in line for an hour, I'm really sorry, but screaming and yelling at me because you stood in line for an hour for me to take something and then half of your stuff was so dirty that it's garbage. It's not recycling.
Well, and that gets back to, and again, we're not talking about everybody. We're talking about a small percentage, but they make everybody's day uncomfortable. I was really surprised at the last Eugene collection that so much material came in so poorly, because one of the things that you talk about in the rural areas is how you educate folks and prepare them for bringing that material back and bringing material to a future event, and that people improve over time. And so I kind of had that expectation in Eugene. I mean, this was the third time we had been at the same location, and yet I would say half or more of the people that came had never been and had material that was unprepared. And it made me wonder, how did they learn about it? And I keep hearing about, you know, well, you should advertise, you should do this. It's like, well, not sure we want to advertise. And number one, you know, for risk of getting too much dirty stuff, but two, that would be an additional expense, an advertising expense to advertise a free event that incurs all of this cost, you know, and time and money. And
so
it's a getting back to the pencil thing.
Not just that, I don't think a lot of people realize that we've been exceeding capacity since before we expanded to Eugene. And we wouldn't have been able to expand to Eugene without Lane County Waste Management's help, and their help by transporting their own materials of 245 has alleviated 50% of what we collect. And so without that, we wouldn't be able to do it in the first place. But we, and by we, I mean me, my house is overrun by plastic. I have plastic in my kitchen right now. I have plastic in my dishwasher. There's plastic in my driveway, on my porch, in my mom's room, in my room, and in my laundry room.
Right.
And I have 3 storage units of plastic that is in the process of either being sorted or needs to go up to Agilix or needs to go to St. Vincent de Paul. Or right now I have 5 super sacks of plastics for Lane County that I can't even really transport because I need to go run a truck. And so I think by advertising, we would get more material, but can we handle more material? And the answer really is, until we can get a truck of our own and a trailer of our own, and honestly, like, truth be told, a building of our own, because the demand is growing. At each event, our lines are getting longer. We have more walk-offs at each event than we did the previous one by people who got tired of waiting. And so if we were to have a facility and our own vehicle, we would be able to do this in a more, I'd say, geocentric manner. So it's coming to you or closer into your neighborhood. It's frequent, or you can bring it to a facility. But that all takes money. And we're operating at capacity. I don't think people realize a website, yeah, you can do a free website, but people complained about my free website that I actually paid like $400 for. Our current website, I have a web designer who spends countless hours every week helping keep it up. We need to actually pay for time. We have to pay for all of these things. I don't think people realize we actually do advertise, but we do it in the cheapest way we can think of, and that's called Facebook boosts. We boost events. We have our recycling group, and you're right, about 50% of people were brand new at the last one. Word of mouth is spreading. We've printed, I asked our printer guy today how many brochures he printed for me this last year. We printed 11,760 brochures in 2020.
Wow.
And he was my printer ever since we expanded to Eugene. So we're talking Eugene, Florence. We're talking, I want to say August on, because that's when I signed the agreement to come in, and we made a massive print order. Yeah, we have probably 200 brochures left. I just had to order more. And so that spreads. Our website at this point has been seen, I think, through its entire lifetime, more than 20,000 different unique IP addresses. And so honestly, coming into 2021, we're looking for more support than what we needed in 2020 so that we can meet all this growing demand and actually try and make a more sizable dent in the plastic pollution that we see.
Right.
Yeah, we're the largest community collector. We've collected and submitted over 18,000 pounds in 245 material.
Yeah.
We have also recycled more than 9,000 pounds through TerraCycle and my other recyclers.
Yeah.
In addition to 7,500 pounds of either electronic recycling or durable goods donated to various thrift stores. So we're hovering at about 35,000 pounds diverted from the landfill. Like in all said total.
So 17 tons.
Yes.
That's astounding. That's astounding.
But is it when we have over 250,000 residents in Lane County and the average plastic footprint is 185 pounds of plastic per human being in this county? And that's an average. Mind you, most, as our waste studies have revealed, Oregon's waste in comparison to the national averages, and in some areas it's a little bit higher, other areas it's lower. And so it would be interesting to see what is the average Oregonian's plastic footprint a year. Because average is one thing. I'm interested locally. And then my interest is not only to reduce it through recycling, but also through educating and trying to help people make better choices.
I know you've been working hard. You have some organic partnerships that have supported you from the beginning. Locally, there's a shipping store, your web designer initially, some other partnerships. I know now you are trying to seek larger agreements with others and hopefully leading toward that building, leading toward that vehicle. Gosh, I wish you all the best in doing that, but you're doing that at the same time you're also doing all these collections and nobody's getting paid. And you amaze me so much of all that you are able to do and all that you are willing to do. You know, I've been with waste management since 2008, and yeah, I don't want to do it. I don't want to wash plastic in my bathtub. No way.
Kelly, my motivating factor is I drive to Eugene frequently, and I see the growth of our landfill every day.
Yeah.
I see it every single day that I have to go into town.
Yeah.
And so that's a stark reminder for me of what I'm working to reduce. And I'm also, it's not just the landfill that I'm worried about. I'm also worried about why aren't we maintaining and our resources at a whole part level? Why aren't we doing it from the producer all the way down to the consumer?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that right now it is literally sitting on Lane County's back and volunteers?
Yeah.
And EcoGeneration donors who desperately don't want to see this either in the landfill or on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, this work that Sarah talked about on Tuesday and Carolyn talked about on Thursday, there's legislation that's coming up in Oregon this month that hopefully will address some of that. And I see a lot in the news that there's more and more demand for awareness of the need and demand for brands, big brands, to financially take financial responsibility for getting this stuff back out of the environment, because it doesn't go away. It just goes somewhere else, and usually not anywhere that we want it to be.
You know, Kelly, I think that's a great point. And there's actually a couple places that don't. So Apothecary in Cottage Grove pays an overhead fee so that we can recycle dispensary packaging, not to just recover their dispensary packaging, but because they don't want to see all of that plastic waste go to a landfill or side of the road. The UPS store is paying for shipping materials because she doesn't want to see all of that waste go to the landfill.
Mm-hmm. You reuse shipping materials.
They reuse them, a lot of them. Trust me, she gets plenty of reused shipping materials that we also clean to COVID standards for her, so it is safe for her to reuse them. Mm-hmm. And so she reuses them, but she also collects Amazon plastic on plastic mailers at her shipping place when people return things because she can't use them. And so, but she's also paying for us to collect all of those mailers and to store them and or recycle them. Because right now, as you know, we're kind of in a plastic film bind where we're storing plastic and trying to find a new partner to deal with that. But we have a couple places that pay an overhead to be a stream sponsor, but it really isn't enough when you consider. I think we spent around $27,000, maybe $30,000 in 2020. My budget for 2021 is $44,000, and that doesn't really include much for an expanded Eugene. It doesn't include anything for payroll, even though I've been doing this pretty much full time for over a year now.
It doesn't include a building.
It also doesn't include a truck or insurance for a truck. So if I get a truck, the maintenance is going to have to be on me. It's going to have to be in my personal name and my insurance, because the second I give it to EcoGeneration, the general liability for a business truck is going to be astronomically high for us.
Yeah. Marianne Williams used to say, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you don't have to pay your electricity this month. You know, I mean, nonprofits have the same bills as businesses. They don't necessarily have the same way to generate income. Because a master recycler was asking, she works at a large shipper, and she said that for every shift, they have like a roll cart full of clean film, and wondered, what she could do with it. And there really isn't anything for a business to do with it unless they want to be a business collector. And so you know, I'm always saying call Trex, see what they have to say, and I decided to call Trex myself, and I got the director of the community program, and he's the person who approves putting a baler in a location so that they can then buy the baled plastic from a community. And so there's a $10,000 baler out there with your name on it. If you had building, if you had insurance, if you had electricity, if you know.
And the interesting thing about that, Kelly, before you contacted Trex, we were in the finalizing stages of getting approved for said placement of a baler. And so, like, we have the approval for it. We have everything except for a building, the insurance.
Yeah.
But I will highlight, ever since like we became a full nonprofit and I can fundraise on Facebook, December we did raise a good amount of money to try and go into 2021. The concern I have though is the whole everyone gives a lot more in December. My concern is that going to be enough to actually sustain us until the community decides to start giving again? Granted, at today's recycling take back, we got our normal donation amount from Cottage Grove.
Nice.
I hate to say this, but I can't continue to operate where the rural areas are covering all of the overhead so that I can operate and serve 3 times the amount of people in the city of Eugene.
And you know what's interesting? It's the flip side. It's usually, you know, every service I provided as a Lane County employee, where the urban subsidizes the rural, and that's the same with waste management. WIC, same way. The cost per to provide a service in rural is supposed to be higher and expected to be higher. So this is really weird that it's going the other direction with recycling. So props to the rural communities for their dedication. And I don't know if they're closer to the wild places or I don't know, but it's really cool that the rural communities take this so seriously as you do and as I do. I've monopolized all of the questions, which I wanted to do, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out to see if there are any questions from any of the attendees we still have with us. So if you have a question for David, either put it in the chat or raise your hand and we will see what we can do. 2021, building for David. So I have a grant support letter that I'm writing. I know Nancy has written, and that's for a rural community grant. Are there any others coming up that you're aware of, or?
So not that I'm aware of, not in the next couple of months. I know that currently working with Lane County Waste Management to hopefully finalize the 2021 sponsorship. Once that's finalized, I'll be able to kind of finalize Eugene's schedule. I'm very much dependent. We're kind of in this reciprocal dependent relationship right now where I need you guys and I help you guys. So we're trying really hard to figure out how best to go forward with that. And then in Cottage Grove, I'm going to try and work with the city councilor to kind of get some funding allocated from the city so that we can actually designate a certain area out here for us. And that really is coming because Cottage Grove is now coming to be our second largest collection area.
Really?
Yes. The biggest reason we went to Eugene, other than you asking, Kelly, was we had Eugene coming down here.
Yeah.
A lot of people wonder, well, why do people travel to you? So I recycle in so many other streams. I can recycle your health and nutrition with labels on, your personal care with labels on. You know, that really has amounted to thousands of pounds.
Yeah. Razors, pop tops, because our recycler does not want the pop tops in Portland.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you consider all of the outside pieces, and I also make it convenient, we try really, really hard to help you learn as much as you can. Oftentimes in my streams that aren't the ones that I give to Lane County, it's a lot more flexible. It doesn't have to necessarily be as clean or 100% label free. EcoGeneration has the absolute gold standard from Lane County. We give you guys the absolute cleanest materials humanly possible.
Yeah.
And I do that because I want to make sure that we never, ever exceed the allotted contamination. I would never want my plastics to not be recycled. And so the best way to do that is to give you as close to 0% contamination. And up until going to Eugene, I arguably had less than 0% as a whole number.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we're not getting any questions really. Jeff Fleming, if you're out there, do you have anything? Can you think if we have forgotten anything? Didn't mention anything? I don't think I think he's off. I think he's off. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything additional per se.
Okay.
Well, what would you say to folks for just learning about EcoGeneration or learning more about EcoGeneration if they want to get involved, want to learn more about what can be recycled through you?
So first and foremost, ecogeneration.org is our website. It is incredibly user-friendly as soon as you realize what you're doing. So when you go to the accepted materials list, click Learn More. The Learn More section is where you will learn everything that you can put in that stream and how to do it. What are your preparation instructions? Recycling with EcoGeneration is our Facebook group. In that group, Kelly, you know I'm super active in that group. You can ask questions. We get a lot of questions. I try really hard to give as clear, concise answers as possible. Sometimes I'm told I'm a little abrupt, but that's literally because I try and be as concise as possible. And then honestly, EcoGeneration's Facebook page itself, that's really important for the actual events. If you're wondering, does David have an event in Eugene at the end of January? Go to EcoGeneration's Facebook page because there you'll find out if there is. If there's not an event page, then there's not likely going to be an event because I have events for absolutely everything, Kelly. Down through calling you at 9 o'clock and saying, hey, Kelly, can I create an event for tonight's discussion or for the discussion? And I think we do that because you can communicate so easily in that forum. So doing that, I really, at EcoGeneration, we're really, really, really working towards a better tomorrow, but we can't do that without your help. And if the very least you can do is recycle your plastics, please, 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 as clean as the dishes in your dishwasher. I have been saying this for over 18 months, and I will say it probably to the day I die. You're not going to eat off of it. I don't want it. It is not recyclable.
Yeah, for sure.
You and I both know that's what created this mess.
That is because if plastic tub is recyclable, then this plastic garden hose is recyclable, and off to the races we went. So
yep.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. It'll be interesting to see how this legislation helps or not, and how we can engage brands and legislators in this process. So good luck to you and to me and to all of us. Thank you everybody for recycling. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording right now.